Hello, my name is Graham Curry. I'm one of the world's few professors of public transport. I've had about 40 years experience working on public transport systems around the world. I also have worked a lot in New Zealand transit systems. In fact, I've probably worked in every town and city in New Zealand on public transport there over my career. The New Zealand Transport Agency has asked me to talk about why public transport is important for New Zealand. Well, I think the starting point for New Zealand is to realise that public transport fills a big gap, a lifeline, if you like, for transport disadvantaged folk. You know, people with no cars, low-income groups, young people, particularly people with impairments. All these groups have got important needs for travel, just like us all, and really they often have no car access. So we're filling a gap there. Something that's not widely understood, I think, is that there's also something called transport poverty. This is where about 25% of all low-income groups have a big problem with the fact that they have got no public transport, and they often have no choice but to buy cars which they can't afford. And when we get this problem, it creates a lot of problem and pressure on their expenditure. Big problem in New Zealand, a growing one. But the needs for public transport in New Zealand go well beyond this, and in fact they go well beyond this for the rest of the planet as well. Since 2007, the majority of the world's population lives in cities, and by 2030 that population will have doubled. This is the millennium of the city. It is what human beings are. We are city dwellers. And you might think, well, New Zealand's a pastoral economy. It's not really like that. Well, you're wrong. New Zealand is one of the most urbanised countries in the world. You are more urbanised than Australia. The highest share of your population lives in cities. And these urbanised areas are actually growing. You know, you're more urbanised than the United Kingdom. And our cities are growing massively. Melbourne and Sydney in the whole region will be larger than London within 20 years. And Auckland will have almost doubled in size between the year 2000 and 2040. You know, this is a picture which will not be untypical for humanity. Large, dense areas, supremely great economic activity and livability and activity, lots of opportunities for people. But we've got to be clever and efficient in how we run these cities, otherwise they get very congested. And when we look at public transport, it is the most efficient way of carrying people compared to all of the other modes. Literally thousands can be carried in a small space of time. Also, the space taken up by public transport is so much more efficient. On the left there we see how much space is required to carry 50,000 people every hour each direction, and we either need 18 motorway lanes or we need virtually one lane for a light railway or a railway. And the other diagram shows the footprint again for each of the different modes. And we see the most efficient is walking and bicycling, but over distance, the most efficient really is train, tram and bus. And then there's the environmental efficiency, the amount of emissions coming out of these vehicles. Very high for cars. Electric cars are good, but look at their huge footprint. Whereas bus, tram, train are a much better mix of that. And that efficiency shows in the way our cities run. Here's a picture of Melbourne in 2004. The red bits are all of the high traffic congestion hotspots in 2004. And this is what was predicted for virtually this year, 2021. Vast growth of that. And this is coming to New Zealand as well. Studies in Auckland say the cost of congestion in 2017 was up to $1,300 million New Zealand dollars every year, and it was an 18% increase in costs between 2014 and 2017. We've got to get efficient, and public transport's so much more efficient in that sort of context. You know, in Melbourne we had one railway tunnel that was the equivalent in scale of 19 motorway lanes, or equivalent of effectively 5 motorways. Now, motorways are a really ugly part of cities, and you know the world's trying to move away from them. If you have to deal with an expanded city and want to be efficient about it, no one in the world is really building motorways anymore. And there's another problem with motorways. Since the last 2 decades, we've seen a meteoric decline in the efficiency of car carrying. The occupancy of cars has been plummeting. It really is almost an epidemic. And in New Zealand it has as well. Auckland, 1.1 people per car. The share of cars in Auckland with one person in them is more than 90% now. And this is not a way to run a country, to fill roads jam-packed full of cars very inefficiently and have a declining occupancy. We need to do the opposite of that. And young people are showing the way. This diagram shows the worldwide trend of young people's share of car licensing over time since 1980 to 2015. I hope you can see from this graph, this is a summary of all the evidence ever published. We have a worldwide decline. It's happening in New Zealand as well. And indeed, worldwide, production of cars is not the same as it was. It is actually in decline in key markets such as the United Kingdom. So the world is changing and New Zealand needs to do that as well. I might add to all of this great concerns about health and transport. And in fact, what we find is that obesity rates are much higher in countries, this is the red here, with lower usage of public transport, walking and cycling. Whereas in countries where high rates of public transport, walking and cycling, we have much better, lower obesity rates. And this is all about walking to and from public transport. It's a great part of the day. And there are many other types of health benefits as well in this slide, which show that public transport is a good idea. Well, I don't have time to go through all of them, but there's a huge range of benefits I haven't had time to mention here. And I'd say to this audience, really, you are the decision makers in your community. You have a real chance to proactively do something about the future of your cities. And I think public transport will be a big part of that for New Zealand. Even for the smaller settlements, there's gaps there that are needed to be filled by having access for everybody, equality of access. I'm Graham Curry. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter if you're interested in chatting. We have a website, ptrg.info, the Public Transport Research Group. Very happy to interact with you. And we run the Researching Transit podcast. Thank you very much. Nice to talk to you.